Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
So I'm excited to welcome the program author Denis Kitchen. Denis, thanks for calling and welcome to our live broadcast of the Miami Book Fair.
No problem, Neil. My pleasure.
Absolutely, Denis. And is this your first time at the Miami Book Fair, by the way?
No, actually, it's the third time.
I'm sure this is a place where finally, and I'm sure you love the book signings at different places where you can really share with your fans and also connect with other authors. Isn't that correct?
Oh, yeah. It's a great place. Absolutely.
It's something that when you have that opportunity to talk to people and meet with them in so many ways, you're like, this is just unbelievably awesome in so many ways. And to have those connections and make those connections and really learn from other people and stuff. When you did your first book fair, what would you say was, especially in Miami, an experience getting to meet with some of your fans? Can you share some of that?
Well, first of all, I'm always coming from Massachusetts, so it's great to take a break in November from the cold snap. But yeah, I love the fact that it's a street fair where you literally, on all sides, you walk down the street, you see vendors, you see other authors. You can't walk 10 feet without bumping into another author. I think there's, 500 of them here? So it's great for collegial reasons as well as meeting the public, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic and unbelievable to make those connections. And Eric, especially when we talk about the variety of authors that we interview on this program, Eric, we learn so much, don't we?
Oh, we always do, and it's great talking to so many different authors from across the world. Like you just said, you came from up from Massachusetts, and now you're down into the warmer weather. I know it's been kind of a cold snap here in Florida, but you got to at least be enjoying no snow. I'm not sure if it was snowing on the ground when you left, but
it's all relative,
Exactly. So talk to us a little bit about being a cartoonist and a writer. I mean, that's a pretty interesting combination.
Yeah, I wear a number of hats. I also was a publisher for many years. So the book the two books I'm primarily promoting here. One is a biography of Al Capp, who during his era was the most famous cartoonist in America, hands down, and a controversial character. He was plagued toward the end of his career with the same kind of charges that Bill Cosby is undergoing right now. So I was fascinated with him as a genius cartoonist, but a flawed man. And the other one I'm promoting is the Best of Comics book, Comics with an X. That was an experimental magazine I did for Stan Lee and Marvel Comics 40 years ago.
Wow. It's really interesting to see all of Stan Lee's work coming out as well, because there's now that his brand is growing, even after he sold it.
He's 90 years old, and he's still full of amazing energy.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, I hope when I'm that age I can be that rambunctious and creative.
I know. He's an inspiration.
He really is. Now, Neil, have you had a chance to watch and see any of the cartooning and stuff that's going on in today's industry?
No, not really. Is that something, Eric, that you're really interested in a lot of ways? Is cartoons, or do you like the comic book types of stuff, Eric?
Well, I almost became a cartoonist. It was one of my passions, and when I actually graduated high school, I almost went to art college to become a cartoonist. So this is kind of a neat option for me, or a neat opportunity to be able to interview Denis and talk about cartooning.
Well,
Denis, how long have you been sketching it? Since you were a kid, or?
Oh, yeah. It starts in grade school, and if you get encouragement from other kids in class, it's kind of like, I think comedians are the same way. If you get laughs, you keep doing it. And I was lucky I had some teachers who were very encouraging. So it eventually just snowballed into a career, and no looking back.
That's amazing. So do you have any future works planned right now, or anything that you're working on?
Working on several things right now. A couple of them aren't officially announced yet. I'm not allowed to talk about them. I'd be happy to talk about Al Capp or the experiment with Marvel. I don't know if either of those are on your radar.
Definitely.
Definitely. Tell us about Al Capp a bit.
Well, like I said, he was the most famous cartoonist of his era. He created Little Abner. He's the only cartoonist besides Walt Disney who had his own theme park in Arkansas. There was a place called Dog Patch USA, Al Cap was a regular guest on all the TV shows, the talk shows like Tonight Show, Johnny Carson, and before that, Jack Parr and Steve Allen. He was a major figure who not only had his daily comic strip, was read about 90 million people a day at its peak, but he also had a newspaper column. He had a radio show. He was everywhere. He had his own TV show for a while in the early 50s. He's unlike any cartoonist you can name today. Most people are familiar with characters, but you ask a person on the street, who drew Peanuts or whatever, most people will hesitate because the cartoonist doesn't usually get the big byline. But Al Cap was an exception. He was bigger than life.
Definitely sounds like it in so many ways, and he would kind of be who would you kind of would compare in other types of art, like in movies or television?
Well, he would have been the biggest star. In movies, he would have been Brad Pitt. He was a superstar, and he was also a curmudgeon, so he was always good for sound bites. Most of his career, he was a solid liberal, and then as the Vietnam War began to grow and the anti-war movement grew, he suddenly changed politics, and he became very much to the right. He became close friends with Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew, and his strip started becoming more political and less funny, and that was part of his downfall, as he himself admitted later in life, that the strip stopped being funny because he had a political agenda. So he became controversial, whereas earlier he was kind of loved by all sides. In later life, that changed, and then, as I alluded to earlier, he got involved in some sex scandals, which certainly didn't help, and he ended up basically the last few years in disgrace.
When you're talking more and more about Al Cap in so many ways, why do you think politically, do you think it was that political time that he got more and more involved in those types of political types of cartoons and away from what truly made him brilliant in certain ways, and it kind of led to his fans being disappointed? Or, whenever you get political, you're going to lose some fans that might have really enjoyed your work.
Right. I think it was a misjudgment on his call, but I think it was sincere. I don't think, he staged this just so he could be controversial. I think he lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he saw some students rioting in Boston and throwing stones at the chancellor's car and things that just personally upset him. He was kind of a law and order guy, and he thought peaceful protests were fine, but when they started to get violent, it genuinely upset him, and so that affected the politics. In terms of looking at his career objectively, it was a real turning page. And for a while, he handled it very cleverly. There was an incident, for example, with the folk singer Joan Baez, who he hated. So he did a strip in Little Abner where a folk singer comes into the strip who's really homely and untalented, has flies buzzing around her head like she's never bathed, and basically it's called Joni Phony. And so as soon as that started appearing, reporters went to Joan Baez after one of her concerts, and they said, "What do you think about what Al Cap's doing to you?" And she was quite indignant, and she said she was going to have her lawyers look into it. So then, of course, they went to Al Cap, and he was waiting for them. And he said, "Look, the character in my strip is homely, untalented, never bathes, and I'm surprised Miss Baez finds any resemblance to herself." And after that got a cheap laugh, then he went for the zinger, which was, "She makes a living as a protest singer. Am I not allowed to protest?" So he was very clever about it. And a lot of his fans, including myself, I was a student at that point, caught up in the anti-war movement. And so I was beginning to develop this very confused attitude toward Cap, because I did love his strip, but I was not happy with his political shift.
Dennis,
Eric, go ahead. I know you have some interesting questions. I was just going to mention again, we're on broadcasting live from the Miami Book Fair, powered by Life Improvement Radio on the Total Education Network. And Al Cap reminded a lot of when we were learning more about the dark secrets of Jim Henson in certain ways last year, Eric. Remember that?
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I was going to bring up with all these comedians and comics and various negativity things coming out, in the press right now. And with Al Cap touching on, his anti-war movement, his change in politics, and talking about him a little bit as itself, especially since there was rumors of sexual issues towards the end of his career. Have you had any feedback from the readers, positive or negative, or anyone that's kind of touched on those topics?
Well, it's funny. I've actually had a couple of emails from women who said they saw him or were accosted by him at colleges where he spoke in the mid to late 60s. He was one of the most popular campus speakers, getting top dollar, and he took advantage of that to basically force himself on some co-eds, as is at least alleged. He was only convicted once, but there were numerous allegations and rumors over the years. So most people who have given me feedback have thought it was a very fair biography, but there are always those, of course, of a certain political persuasion. I've had a couple who thought, who let's say shared his later views, who thought the book didn't handle that fairly. But my co-author, Michael Schumacher, and I, we bent over backwards to really restrain ourselves, stick to the facts, no innuendo. And believe me, for the handful of cases that we recounted, they were all based on actual either an indictment or news that was reported that we could then report again. We did not write about anything that was unfounded and strictly based on rumor. But we had stories that we didn't use that went back to the 1940s that preceded his actual problems by 25 years or so. So
wow.
We think it was a lifelong proclivity of his. We'll never be able to prove it. The family, of course, was very protective and not particularly happy to see this revisited, but, the truth is the truth.
Wow, that's interesting. Now, with the other book, talking about the comics and things like that, give us a little bit of background. Neil, are we okay on time?
Yeah, we're good. I'm just I'm communicating with my producer, so you continue. We can just do this back and forth thing sometimes. No problem.
Okay, sure. Back in the late '60s, I was involved. I was one of the founding members of what's now called the underground comics movement. Robert Crumb is probably the best known of that group. Maybe the Furry Freak Brothers, and so there was a period in the early '70s where I was actually a pen pal with Stan Lee because I had sent him my material, and he was very gracious and kind, and we literally became pen pals. And he offered me jobs a couple of times, which I turned down simply because I was having more fun doing underground comics. But in 1973, we had a Supreme Court decision on obscenity that threw it back into local vicinities, and that really threw a wrench into our distribution because we were in head shops at the time, and head shops were already not the most popular retail outlets in most stores in the early 1970s, and so I suddenly found that the business was getting shaky. So this time when Stan Lee called and offered me a job, I said, let's talk. But I was insistent that what we do is something experimental, and unlike any superheroes, I wasn't interested in doing those. So he allowed me to do what effectively was an underground comic newsstand magazine with very few restrictions. And so suddenly Marvel was paying me and my contributors much more than we were ordinarily making. We were able to do some pretty outrageous stuff and get it on the newsstands next to things like Mad Magazine. But it was too good to be true, as you can imagine, because not only were distributors confused by it, we had basically a revolt within the Marvel staff, the old-timers, who basically said to Stan, why are you giving these long-haired hippies all these special freedoms, including the fact that we were able to get our original art back, they weren't. We were able to keep our copyrights, they weren't. And so it was kind of a Pandora's box he couldn't put back, and so the magazine got scuttled after only 5 issues. But it really was the thing that kind of broke through in terms of content and artists' rights, and the industry was never the same again, they tell me.
Do you ever think about doing something like that in the future, or bringing something like that back?
Well, the thing is now those barricades have been broken, and so there are everywhere you look, the graphic novels and the comic books are now much different than they used to be.
Really interesting.
All right, as we continue broadcasting live from the Miami Book Fair, and who would you say is who do you emulate as in the comic world? Would you say who would you say was your favorite person?
A couple of my heroes would be Harvey Kurtzman, the guy who created Mad. He was a brilliant satirist. Will Eisner, who created The Spirit. Again, those are two giants in the field who really set the pace for the next generation. Among contemporaries, I think Robert Crumb is still terrific. Like Dan Clowes, Chris Ware. There are a number of them, far too many to list. We've got a wealth right now. Graphic novels, basically were just invented around 1978 after Will Eisner did a thing called Contract with God, and that let loose a dam burst, and suddenly dozens and scores and now hundreds of cartoonists are developing graphic novels, which are simply novels that are illustrated. But that was an unknown commodity pre-1978 with very rare and failed experiments. It just wasn't a genre. And now you go into any major bookstore or you go online and you see countless numbers of them. So it's truly been a revolution in terms of the medium really flexing its muscles after, for many years, just being limited to those little pamphlet comic books, like Superman, which were great. But now you can pick up books that are an inch thick, and they're called graphic novels, and they can be on any subject, whatever. We're not restricted to guys with capes. They can be autobiography or historical fiction. You name a category, and there's a graphic novel.
All right, well, Dennis, where is the best place we can find information on you and also purchase your book? I was fascinated to learn about the life of Al. It's amazing, and especially when you talk about bringing up Bill Cosby, and we don't really know the skeletons in closets of these famous people until a lot of times they pass on or someone writes about them later on, and it's fascinating to know the man behind the greatness in so many ways. So, Dennis, where can we purchase your book?
I would say the easiest thing, go online. There's any number of places it can be purchased. Certainly Amazon's an obvious one, but I prefer people buy it in good independent bookstores. My own website is DenisKitchen.com, and I'm sure it won't be hard to find. And I appreciate your time, Neil. And Eric.
All right, well, fantastic. You're fantastic, Dennis, and enjoyed the conversation with you and Eric about this. And, Dennis, keep the line open because our next guest will be coming on the line, and the producer will let me know. So thanks again for calling, Dennis, and best of luck.
You bet.
Okay, take care. All right, bye-bye. All right, we are continuing broadcasting live from the Miami Book Fair, Eric, and so we're going to take a quick little break to move on to before our next guest, and we're going to keep rolling on.
Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and shall not be construed in any way as advice from Life Improvement Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by the producers, writers, or editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the expressed written consent of Life Improvement Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.